Today, we'll discuss one of the most popular films of 2023 and an unexpected box office hit about a not very bankable topic. The piercing blue gaze of the lead actor mesmerized everyone, and this 3-hour epic will undoubtedly go down in the history of cinema.
Movies Inside Out presents
Oppenheimer is a biographical thriller film directed and written by Christopher Nolan, telling the story of Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. How did Robert Pattinson influence the creation of the film? Why were the actors constantly singing Billie Eilish's song on set? And how did the director achieve the shots he wanted? We'll tell you the answers to these questions right now.
And now I am become death.
The creation story. The idea of making a Hollywood film about the Manhattan Project, the US program to produce nuclear weapons, emerged immediately after the end of World War II. Back then, the plan was to show it as a great achievement of the human mind, possible only for 3 thinkers. Many decades later, the father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, was seen as a much more complicated person. In 2005, the book American Prometheus: The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer was published, telling the life story of this controversial scientist. 10 years later, producer J. David Wargo, who once studied physics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, acquired the film rights. The project was in development hell for a long time until Wargo met with his friend and colleague James Woods and shared his idea. This is how other producers got involved in the project, and the book about Oppenheimer reached Christopher Nolan. One of the highest-grossing directors of our time, Nolan was fascinated by the Manhattan Project, having grown up during the second wave of the campaign for nuclear disarmament. His first encounter with Oppenheimer's name was thanks to Sting's song Russians, which included the lines, "How can I save my little boy from Oppenheimer's deadly toy?"
How can I save my little boy?
He used to have a fear of nuclear catastrophe in his childhood, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine triggered that forgotten anxiety. Nolan considers Robert Oppenheimer the most important person in history who created the world we live in. It's no coincidence that a character in his film Tenet mentions the physicist and compares the creation of a doomsday device to the development of nuclear weapons. Finally, Nolan decided to make a film about Oppenheimer thanks to a gift from Robert Pattinson at the party celebrating the completion of Tenet. The actor gave the director a collection of Oppenheimer's speeches. These texts showed Nolan an opportunity for a fascinating character study. He wanted to tell everyone the real story and let the audience feel what it was like to be Oppenheimer after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The heart of Nolan's script is Oppenheimer's reaction to the consequences of his discovery. The director decided to share the story from different perspectives. The color scenes are shown from the physicist's point of view, while the black and white scenes represent objective moments, devoid of opinions and emotions. In the script, Nolan wrote the subjective part in first person, including scene descriptions. For example, instead of writing Oppenheimer enters the room, he wrote I enter the room. This unusual solution by the director surprised the actors when they received the script. By the way, the text was printed in black ink on red paper to prevent copying. Also, Nolan described all the visual effects down to the smallest detail. The filmmaker wanted to display physics through imagery and sound so that the audience would see the world as Oppenheimer did with his knowledge of the quantum world and waves and feel the sense of threat from the situation. As Christopher explained to his visual effects supervisor, "We have to find a way into this guy's head." For consultation, Nolan turned to physicist Robert Digraph, who explained that in the early 20th century, after the transition from classical physics to quantum mechanics, scientists didn't really understand what an atom looked like. It turned out they were not ping-pong balls flying everywhere, but rather energy fields. This revelation amazed the director. "You can no longer visualize the atom," he exclaimed. After that, Christopher decided to focus not on the intelligent perception of physics, but on emotions. He wanted the film to show, on an emotional level, what could be visualized in other ways. By the way, the last 3 of 4 scenes of the film were written by Nolan when he woke up in the middle of the night. Ultimately, they remained unchanged. Christopher was inspired by Oliver Stone's 1991 3-hour epic JFK because of its complex narrative structure about real events. Notably, both films featured Gary Oldman and both won Oscars for editing and cinematography. Nolan entrusted the production of the biographical epic about Oppenheimer to Universal Pictures. Previously, he had worked with Warner Brothers, but he was completely dissatisfied with the way they released Tenet. The digital release happened almost immediately after theatrical. Casting. When Christopher Nolan was writing his script, he didn't imagine any particular actor playing the lead role. However, throughout this time, the director kept the book American Prometheus in front of him. Robert Oppenheimer stared at him from the cover, and one day it dawned on Nolan who could capture that look. The owner of the same deep blue eyes as the famous scientist Cillian Murphy had played supporting roles in several of Christopher's films. So one day, the actor received an unexpected call with an offer for the perfect lead role. It's one of those calls that you get a few times in your career, if you're lucky, and this is one of them, the director declared, and soon personally traveled to Murphy's home in Ireland to hand over the script. Also, he attached a note to the script saying, "Dearest Cillian, finally a chance to see you lead. Love, Chris." Murphy loved the script and was in seventh heaven when he learned of the offer, so he immediately agreed to play Oppenheimer. He plunged into the work, studying the scientist's personality. To achieve a greater physical resemblance to Oppenheimer, the actor lost weight and had a strict diet during filming. According to numerous sources, Cillian ate only almonds to maintain Oppenheimer's gaunt profile.
Why put yourself through more of it? I have my reasons.
He also practiced horseback riding to feel more comfortable in the saddle. For the role, Cillian was reportedly offered $10 million. Currently, this is his highest paycheck. For the role of Louis Strauss, Nolan chose Robert Downey Jr. because he loved his version of Tony Stark from the Marvel Universe. He also liked the idea that the role of Strauss would help the actor break away from his typecast. Nolan didn't travel to him like he did with Murphy, but invited the actor to his home. Robert read the screenplay in the author's presence, and his only reaction was an enthusiastic, "Wow, so will you do it?" Christopher asked. "Yeah, I think I will," Downey Jr. answered. Thus, within minutes, the actor joined the project, although it usually takes hours of negotiations and dozens of phone calls. "But he's Chris Nolan," Robert explained. Emily Blunt met Nolan in Los Angeles, and when he offered her the role of Catherine Oppenheimer, she enthusiastically agreed. The actress also reached out to Murphy to find out what it was like working with Christopher. Matt Damon, who had already worked with Nolan in Interstellar, had promised his wife to take a break from his career to spend time with the family. But there was one exception, a call from Christopher Nolan.
Dr. Oppenheimer. I'm Colonel Groves. This is Lieutenant Colonel Nichols. Have that dry cleaned.
Nolan did call and offered the actor the role of Leslie Groves, the military director of the atomic project. Matt was especially impressed by the first-person narrative in the screenplay, and he agreed without hesitation. He even accepted a pay cut. According to his media reports, his paycheck was $4 million. Reportedly, Robert Downey Jr. and Emily Blunt received the same amount. Almost the entire cast of Oppenheimer joined the project only to work with the director. The acclaimed master of transformations, Gary Oldman, didn't even care that his character, President Truman, appeared in a single scene. By the way, Nolan didn't tell some actors who they would be playing until they signed the contract. For example, Christopher told Florence Pugh that her role wasn't significant. Pugh was happy to have an opportunity to work with Nolan, so she agreed to a $50,000 paycheck. However, her character, Jean Tatlock, turned out to be quite significant, greatly influencing the story. Rumor had it that Rami Malek, who played nuclear physicist David L. Hill, also received $50,000. By the way, Rami was among the last whose roles were publicly revealed. The casting ended in early 2022, and his character was announced only in June 2023. Also, David Dastmalchian's character remained a mystery until the end. He played the executive director of the U.S. Congressional Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, William L. Borden. Perhaps the only actor on set who really understood quantum mechanics was Benny Safdie, playing the theoretical physicist Edward Teller. Benny has been passionate about nuclear physics and cosmic rays since school, and even worked with physicists at Columbia University. Nolan, however, cast him not for this reason, but because he liked Safdie's work in Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza. By the way, some real scientists also were among the extras. The director believed this would make Oppenheimer even more credible. Interestingly enough, Christopher Denham, who appeared in Oppenheimer as the scientist Klaus Fuchs, had already starred in a project about the development of nuclear weapons. In the series Manhattan, he played another physicist, Jim Meeks. The only fictional character in the film was played by Alden Ehrenreich, who appeared as Strauss's assistant. Oppenheimer became Nolan's first film to completely exclude Sir Michael Caine. The actor couldn't leave the UK due to his advanced age and commitment to the films The Great Escaper, and later announced his retirement from acting altogether. The filming process. Typically, projects of this scale require at least a year of preparation, several months of production, and another year for post-production. However, Sir Christopher Nolan needed just 3 months of preparation, including the reconstruction of Los Alamos. The shooting took only 57 days. Murphy, who appeared in nearly every scene, called the pace insane. The team worked without storyboards, and Nolan preferred to do as few takes as possible. The film had the working title Gadget. Principal photography began on February 28, 2022 at a ranch in New Mexico, with some scenes shot in Los Angeles. The crew also obtained permission to work in Oppenheimer's real house in New Mexico and Albert Einstein's office in Princeton, New Jersey. Actor Tom Conti enjoyed walking around the university campus dressed as Einstein and watching people's reactions. The team also planned to film at the White Sands Missile Range where the Trinity test took place, but they failed to create a convenient schedule. Therefore, the location was recreated in the New Mexico desert. Nolan insisted on using authentic 1940s sets to help actors immerse themselves in their roles. Moreover, he required that rehearsals be done in costumes. Between takes, everyone had to remain in character and always be ready for filming. Any actor caught in modern clothing was given a stern look until they changed. To stay within budget, the actors and production team were booked into standard rooms at the Holiday Inn. Nolan and his wife Emma Thomas, who also worked as co-producer, were no exceptions. However, Robert Downey Jr. admitted he chose to pay for a different room to feel comfortable. To relax after intense work, longtime friends Emily Blunt and Matt Damon organized group dinners for the actors, but Cillian Murphy always declined such offers. First of all, he stuck to a strict diet and tried to get 10 hours of sleep every night, so he went to bed early. He also generally disliked late dinners and parties. His colleagues understood that, given the immense workload he was handling. Besides, they could forgive him anything for his mesmerizing eyes. Actors often sang Billie Eilish's song Ocean Eyes for Cillian,
15 flares inside those ocean eyes,
and complained they couldn't shoot scenes with him without getting distracted. Matt Damon, on the other hand, happily devoured Mexican food and drank margaritas every day. His character in real life was overweight, and although the actor didn't have to gain weight, he could eat whatever he wanted without worrying. Christopher Nolan couldn't be happier to have the lives and personalities of the Manhattan Project scientists so well documented. This allowed each actor to learn everything about their character and their relationships with the other team members. For example, the director made a note of Olivia Thirlby. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of her character, scientist Lily Hornig. Additionally, she suggested hairstyle and outfit ideas and was excellent at improvising. Olivia was the one to come up with the name for the film's cast text chat, Oppenhomies. The colleagues still keep in touch there, even after completing work on Oppenheimer. Cillian Murphy suggested that Thirlby trademark the name because otherwise someone else would definitely do it. By the way, Christopher Nolan is not in that chat, not because he is the boss, but because he doesn't have a cell phone. Let's get back to the filming process. Robert Downey Jr. described the conditions as Spartan and almost monastic. There weren't any people running around with their phones, no monitors, and no chairs with his name on it. There weren't even marks on the floor to set the scene. The director explained that the actors shouldn't look for marks to stand on. It was the cinematographer's task to find the actors wherever they were. Speaking of Downey Jr., due to the abundance of dialogues, he learned all his lines by heart even before the filming began. One day, one of the authors of the book about Oppenheimer, Kai Bird, visited the set. He was struck by Cillian Murphy's resemblance to the prototype and greeted the actor with, "Dr. Oppenheimer, I've been waiting decades to meet you." Murphy just laughed and assured him that all the actors had read the writer's book. By the way, to look even more similar to the scientist, the actor had nicotine stains applied to his fingers to reflect his passion for smoking. Unfortunately, the other author of American Prometheus, Martin J. Sherwin, couldn't even participate in the film negotiations. He was diagnosed with cancer and passed away in October 2021. Nolan used 70mm IMAX film. According to him, it provides the best picture quality and allows the audience to fully immerse themselves in the story. To materialize the director's idea with color and black and white scenes, Kodak produced a limited batch of XX black and white film, which was chosen for a reason. It was used by photographers during World War II. By the way, Kodak is connected with one of the characters in Oppenheimer, Louis Strauss. He financed the company which led to the development of the first successful color film. The final film reel for theaters is 11 miles long and weighs 600 pounds. Due to its impressive size, the film was noisy during shooting, making it difficult to record dialogues. Other directors would solve the problem by dubbing in the studio, but not Nolan. He likes the live performance of actors at the moment of shooting, not overdubbed lines. After the premiere, many viewers complained that some dialogues sounded muffled and were hard to understand, but Nolan stood by his decision. It's an artistic choice. When everyone learned that Christopher Nolan was making a film about nuclear weapons, his fans joked that the director might actually blow something up for a beautiful shot. It's flattering that people would think I would be capable of something as extreme as that on the one hand, but it's also a little bit scary, Nolan shared. Of course, Christopher did not trigger a nuclear reaction, but there were real explosions, although smaller ones. During the Trinity test scene, real footage was combined with CGI. For that purpose, the crew used a mixture of gasoline and propane. They also used aluminum and magnesium to imitate the white light. They filmed at high speed from different angles and then layered the images to create a nuclear mushroom cloud. No scenes in Oppenheimer are entirely computer-generated. Digital effects were applied over already filmed scenes. To depict nuclear reactions, visual effects artists had to work hard. They threw ping-pong balls, splashed paint on the walls, and filmed all this at different frame rates. Nolan did not share how exactly they had achieved the final effect, but emphasized that it was not CGI. Nolan considered it a too safe method, and Oppenheimer couldn't be safe. The film, according to his concept, had to be both beautiful and threatening. Nolan added tension to the scenes with the actors too. For instance, when Roger Robb interrogated Oppenheimer, Nolan instructed Jason Clarke to suddenly stand up and shout his lines right in Cillian Murphy's face.
Ah! That's a war face! Now let me see your war face! Ah!
But off camera, so viewers would only see the tense face of the main character. Interrogation scenes were intentionally filmed in a tiny office, not in a studio where walls could be moved. Christopher Nolan wanted the actors to feel the walls pressing down on them, and the lack of air conditioning only added to their discomfort. During filming, the director and other crew members had to crouch or sit on the floor to stay out of the shot. Cillian Murphy, by the way, calls these scenes his favorite because they were filmed at the very end. As for one of the final scenes, Nolan deliberately asked Robert Downey Jr. to repeat the monologue after he said he had given it his all. The director wanted Robert to look irritated in that scene. For Oppenheimer, Nolan filmed a sex scene for the first time in his career. It was the scene between Cillian Murphy and Florence Pugh's character. And as bad luck would have it, the camera broke down during the very scene, so the actors had to lie naked, hugging each other, while the crew tried to fix the equipment. To deal with the awkward situation, Florence started asking what exactly was wrong with the camera and learning the technical details of the film production. The director left several Easter eggs in the film. For example, the leaves depicted on Oppenheimer's kitchen curtains are ginkgo tree leaves. They were the only trees that survived the Hiroshima bombing. Also, the resemblance of the scene where Oppenheimer puts on a hat to the Batman scene where Bruce Wayne wears his costume was intentional. Nolan wanted to show that Oppenheimer was a true superhero and his superpower was using atomic energy. Moreover, the director hinted at Jean Tatlock's violent death. In one scene, you can see hands in black gloves holding the girl's head underwater. This was done intentionally. Many people believe Tatlock was killed by the FBI because she could have shared nuclear secrets with the Soviet Union. The music in the film is also interesting. The score after the scene with Niels Bohr and young Oppenheimer changes tempo 21 times. Initially, it was planned to record it in parts, but the crew managed to do it in one take. Movie mistakes and errors. Now let's count some goofs and mistakes made in Oppenheimer. Around the 14th minute, when the main character and Robbie meet on a train going to Zurich, Oppenheimer's cigarette switches from his right to left hand and back several times. And a little later, Robbie, like a magician, suddenly produces orange slices out of nowhere. In the scenes depicting Oppenheimer's early years of study in Göttingen, he is listening to the recording of The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky, performed by the San Francisco Symphony on March 10, 1945. However, the story takes place in the 1920s. The main character's speech in Dutch barely makes any sense. It's mostly because Nolan greatly shortened the scene, but also because he deliberately didn't translate the quantum physics terms, considering them too complicated. By the way, in the official German version, Oppenheimer speaks Dutch fluently. When attributing the quote, "property is theft" to Karl Marx, Oppenheimer and Jean Tatlock make a mistake. This phrase belongs not to Marx, but to Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, with whom the author of Capital disagreed on some fundamental philosophical issues. In scenes where Oppenheimer writes on a board, the appearance and size of the letters and figures change between shots. In reality, Oppenheimer consulted about the probability of igniting the atmosphere and blowing up the world not with Einstein, but with Arthur Holly Compton, the director of the Manhattan Project team at the University of Chicago. Dr. Teller should have limped due to an accident he got into in 1928. However, he walks perfectly well on screen. In the film, Robert Oppenheimer has a piercing mark on his left ear. The scientist didn't pierce his ears, but Cillian Murphy did. Most of the characters wearing glasses have progressive lenses, which were invented only in the 1980s. The bottom half of such lenses distorts the image more than the top half. Older lens designs caused eye strain, so it's no surprise that actors were spared this discomfort. When the protagonist approaches the tower at the test site, the wind is so strong that he cannot put on his hat. But at the top of it, there is suddenly no wind at all, even though the building is open. The device counting down to the Trinity test has a Soviet display from the 1970s. Additionally, Oppenheimer receives a Q clearance. This indeed was necessary for access to top-secret data, but it was introduced only after World War II. Also, we see a military truck having a warning left-hand drive, but in the US, left-hand drive is standard, so this wouldn't surprise anyone. Such labels were put on American trucks in the UK, so most likely the vehicle in the shot was used there. Before the Trinity test, it rains heavily all night, but after sunrise, the ground is already dry and dusty. In the scenes taking place in 1943 to 1944, President Truman is mentioned several times, but he only took office in 1945. Before that, the position was held by Roosevelt. When Truman did become president, the portrait of Argentine leader José de San Martín appeared in his office only in 1946. But in the film, it was already there during his meeting with Oppenheimer in 1945. When Oppenheimer speaks to the audience in Los Alamos after Hiroshima, there is an African American among the viewers. But in reality, there were no African Americans in Los Alamos until 1947. Although about a dozen black scientists and technical specialists worked on the Manhattan Project in Chicago, the same mistake is made in the scene of Oppenheimer's quantum physics lecture in 1930. At that time, African American women couldn't study advanced physics. The film also mentions black holes, but this term was coined only in the 1960s. Before that, physicists used terms like collapsed objects or collapsars. The term weapon of mass destruction also could not be used in the 1940s during discussions about the bombing of Japan. Also, until the 1960s, the American flag did not have 50 stars, but in the film, people are waving such flags during Oppenheimer's speech. Moreover, at Strauss's confirmation hearings, we also see modern flags. The Mexican flag that appears during Oppenheimer's speech in Los Alamos is also incorrect. It's a modern version, while in 1945, the flag looked slightly different. When Strauss escorts Oppenheimer to his car, a boom mic appears in the car window just for a moment. There is a goof in the emotional scene at the end of the film where Robert Downey Jr. gives his all. Initially, Strauss is wearing suspenders, but for a moment, the suspenders are gone. At the end of the film, Strauss's assistant mentions John F. Kennedy, calling him a young guy trying to make a name for himself. But the events are supposed to take place in 1959, when Kennedy was already famous and considered the leading Democratic candidate for the presidential nomination. However, this might not be an error but a subtle joke by the director. Fans believe Nolan intentionally downplayed Kennedy's significance to draw attention to him. Near the very end of the film, when Oppenheimer receives an award from President Lyndon Johnson in 1963, Ernest Lawrence can be seen among those present. In reality, the scientist died in 1958. On screen, Oppenheimer claims that Secretary of War Stimson changed his mind about bombing Japan, believing that the Japanese were ready to surrender. However, this was not true. The scene with the apple at the beginning of the film is the most controversial. Robert Oppenheimer's grandson claims that his grandfather did not try to poison anyone. However, he argues not with Nolan but with the authors of the book that the film is based on. The writers themselves admitted that this story is doubtful. Deleted scenes and bloopers. Cillian Murphy mentioned in an interview that there are no deleted scenes in Chris Nolan's films. According to him, Nolan knows exactly what he needs for his film and doesn't bother with unnecessary scenes. The director himself has said that he cuts everything unnecessary when writing the script to save budget, time, and energy. Yet Oppenheimer is still 180 minutes long, breaking Nolan's previous record. Interstellar runs for only 169 minutes. The director prefers to never show bloopers except for a bit of behind-the-scenes footage.
With location shooting or sets, the more things can just be real, the better they're going to feel to the audience.
However, the final version of the film had to be modified in some countries. In India and many Middle Eastern countries, a digital black dress was added to Tatlock, sitting topless in the original version. Worldwide recognition.
The man of the moment.
The production of Oppenheimer cost around $100 million. The studio allocated additional $100 million for marketing. Producer Emma Thomas admitted that they would consider it a miracle if the film surpassed Nolan's Dunkirk at the box office for the opening weekend. Dunkirk collected $50.5 million, while Oppenheimer grossed an incredible sum, $80.5 million. Moreover, Oppenheimer became the highest-grossing World War II film in history. This all happened even though an HD copy of the film mysteriously appeared on pirate websites shortly after the theatrical release. The box office success was supported by Barbie. Released on the same day, the films sparked the Barbenheimer phenomenon, encouraging audiences to watch both films in one day, or at least dressed in pink for Barbie and black for Oppenheimer. The worldwide total exceeded $970 million, with 15% of the total profits going to Christopher Nolan. He reduced his paychecks for directing, writing, and producing, betting on the film's success with audiences, and he was proved right. He earned about $70 to $85 million, and this sum has only grown thanks to streaming the licensing revenue. Critics and Nolan's colleagues praised Oppenheimer, and the film received numerous awards. The pinnacle of success was the Academy Awards, where Christopher Nolan won Best Director, Cillian Murphy won Best Actor, and Robert Downey Jr. won Best Supporting Actor. Additionally, Academy Awards were given for cinematography, editing, and the soundtrack. Finally, the top prize of the ceremony, Best Picture, also went to Oppenheimer. Also, Oppenheimer drew attention to the topics of nuclear weapons and science. David L. Hill, played by Rami Malek, even got his own Wikipedia page just 3 days after the film's release. What about you? What was your impression of Oppenheimer?